This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hi everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I am very pleased to be joined by Will Sloan, who is the author of a new book, Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. He is himself a writer and a podcaster, a noble art form that we were just talking off mic about. Thank you so much for joining me, Will.
Thank you. John was asking me before we started recording how he should introduce me, and I said writer, and then I said, well, I guess also podcaster, which is, literally how I make my living. But there's something with that word podcaster. I don't know. It's not. It doesn't sound as dignified as writer, and yet maybe it should be. Right. This is a valid art form. We're in the trenches, you and me.
We're going back to Homer, where the oral tradition.
Yeah. Oh man, I love it. That's so true. I'm gonna call myself a philosopher from now on.
Oral transmitter of the culture. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm amazed that you make money out of it. That's my that would be. I mean, I've got to the point where it's not costing me money, which I never thought I'd get.
That's a huge achievement.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. And hey, knock wood, this whole economy can collapse tomorrow. Patreon can collapse, or everyone can just decide that they've heard enough of me, which I would at this point. I think I've heard enough of me, but I don't know. I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to have this while I have it.
How does it feel to be on the other side of the sort of the situation when you're being a guest of the podcast rather than the host?
Actually, I find it great because I don't have to worry about. I feel like so much responsibility is on the host to just be a host, to establish the sort of rapport. There's a lot I don't have to worry about. Although on the other hand, I will say I do. So I'm going to contradict myself instantly. I do care more about being a good podcast guest than I care about being a host, because I feel like, I'm a guest in someone's home. I feel like I want to earn my keep on someone else's turf. So yeah, I guess I have conflicted feelings about that.
You have to sing for your dinner.
Yeah, that's right.
I must admit, I've been doing a few podcasts now as the guest, and I totally agree with you. I think there's a real sense of like, oh, what a relief that I don't have to think of questions. I can just I can just bat them back, Yeah, no, it is a pleasant break, and it's kind of a learning situation where you learn from being on the other side what a good question is, and and how long you feel comfortable talking for, and things like that.
Well, totally. And if you have guests on, you're very acutely aware of how good it is to have a good guest. So, if I'm in a position like this, I don't want to just answer in monosyllables, which, 10 years ago I might have done, but now I know that they actually want like a real answer. You're here to entertain, among other things.
Yeah. I'll often have guests who'll say, I've given you a very long answer to that. And it's just like, yeah, that's good for me. Yeah. That works. I mean, nobody wants to hear me talk. They want to hear the guest talk. That's the main point. And speaking of which, this book that you've written, Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA, this is great, this book. And I think one of the reasons it's great is we all know Ed Wood from the Tim Burton film. Some of us may know him from having seen Plan 9 from Outer Space, Glenn and Glenda, and other sort of films which are pretty much readily available on YouTube, and some of which are easy to get hold of, some of which are a little less so. But I feel this is the first time I really got to know who he was and in the context of what he was doing. So, and it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing, like somebody who maybe knows the Tim Burton film and knows one or two of the major hits, that is kind of, I hope fans of Ed Wood will like the book too. But what you're describing is also kind of my target audience here. So much has happened in the field of Ed Wood studies over the last, 15 or 20 years. Many of his lost films have been rediscovered. Many of his writings have come to light because for the last 20 years of his life, he was basically supporting himself as a writer of, well, frankly, pornographic paperbacks and a lot of articles. Articles would be written in the pages of like dirty magazines. But just a huge amount of his work has come to light that I think has added texture to him as an artist. Also, some of the movies that he made that aren't Plan 9 from Outer Space, like I feel he got this reputation as the worst director of all time, which in some ways can act as a barrier to appreciating certain of his other films because they don't all hit on that level. They aren't all like funny every scene, every second of the way. Some of them are just sort of more conceptually strange or they cast a strange mood. So with the book, I wanted to sort of spread the good news about Ed Wood as an artist. I'm not necessarily reclaiming him as a good filmmaker, whatever that means, but I wanted to convey to people who maybe didn't know his work too deeply that there was this consistent artistic personality from beginning to end that you can see develop and you can see kind of mulling over the same themes. Yeah, I wanted people to get to know people who didn't think there was anything there beyond just like the flying saucers on strings and the tombstones falling over. I wanted them to get to know Ed.
Well, you actually make that point in terms of Plan 9 from Outer Space. You say, look, if you're going to watch this for laughs, you can sort of stop watching about half to half an hour because that's as funny, that's as many laughs as you're going to get. So
Absolutely.
and you talk about this, and I found this really interesting, this sort of like dreamlike state that is, and I think you use this term with a sort of caveat or a caution, a sort of Lynchian universe that you enter into.
Yeah, well, when I was pitching the book, at one point in the meeting, somebody said, "Are you proposing a sort of radical reevaluation of him? Are you saying that you think he's actually a good filmmaker?" And that actually kind of caught me off guard because I hadn't quite answered that question to myself. And I think the answer that I came up with, he's not merely bad. And so when you talk about the dream quality of his films, I think that kind of gets to the heart of it. I don't think the movies were intended to be dreamlike, but he does accidentally create this very strange world that I think is sort of beautiful. I like being in the Plan 9 from Outer Space cemetery set. I think the world of that set, has no clear geography, it has no clear rules, and it looks fake, but when you're in that set, it's hard to remember what real feels like. And then the fact that this set is inhabited by all these people from different strata of Hollywood who have just sort of ended up here, all of whom are in their own way like embody Hollywood. They're all like symbolic of Hollywood in some way. It feels like Hollywood dreaming about itself. And you mentioned David Lynch. I mean, David Lynch, I was careful to I think I brought up David Lynch once very pointedly. And, looking back, maybe I could have brought him up a few more times, but it often seems like such a crutch that people use in describing something that's surreal to say, oh, it's Lynchian. Like it's such an easy shorthand. But I mean, I feel similar. I think there's something similarly evocative about the way that David Lynch depicts Hollywood in a movie like Lost Highway, where you've got Robert Blake and the poor fellow who shot Brandon Lee and other strange Hollywood characters. Marilyn Manson is in that movie. Just like this weird assemblage of people. There's something about that that's kind of similar to the Boulevard of Broken Dreams quality of Ed Wood's movies.
Yeah, and when you say embodied, it's kind of quite literal in the sense that you have a huge wrestler and you have Elvira, not Elvira, that's the woman who nicked her
Vampira. Yeah, yeah.
Vampira. Yeah, you make that point as well.
And if
That
Vampira was here, she would be very, very upset that you said that
well,
because
she'd
she
sue
spent,
me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, like some of those celebrities, Torch Johnson, Vampira. There's another guy, John Breckenridge, also known as Bunny Breckenridge, who was like a descendant of American nobility, basically. His grandfather was the vice president, and he himself, had some long, colorful career performing in shows in Paris. He was the inspiration for Gore Vidal's Myra Breckenridge, in fact. And I guess by the time he was in Plan 9 from Outer Space, he'd kind of fallen on hard times and had sort of fallen in with Ed Wood's crowd. Um, so there are all of these like really strange Los Angeles novelty celebrities in these films. Criswell, the psychic, is another one. And then you have them next to faded mainstream movie stars from the 1930s, people like Bela Lugosi, Lyle Talbot, Tom Keane, who is a kind of cowboy star. And then you have just people from Ed Wood's entourage, people like just wannabes and his ex-wives and people who gave Ed Wood money and people like that. And just to see all these people hovering around, orbiting the same sun, it tickles me to no end because it feels like they don't belong together. But I don't know, it's a bit like if you walk through the convention hall at some like Comic-Con type place and you'll see all these people who used to be A-listers, people who were maybe in one of the Friday the 13th movies, somebody who's, a backyard filmmaker who's selling his stuff, and they're all there. And it's just this space where time and space and class collapse.
Well, I mean, I watched the Val Kilmer documentary a couple of years
Mhm.
ago, and there's a bit where he's at a convention, sort of signing posters and things, and you sort of think Val Kilmer's a
Mhm.
kind of A star. What are you doing, like at a convention, signing, top secret posters and Top Gun
I
posters and
know.
whatnot?
Yeah.
It just feels like the rough edge of stardom, And at this point, he had ill health, so I presume he had, hospital bills to pay and things like that. So perhaps that was the motivation, but it felt like a real step down. The subtitle of your book is Made in Hollywood, USA, and there is a feeling that, as you've already said, there's this sort of Hollywood of dreams that people are going to. But how did Ed Wood sort of get there? What was his sort of origin story?
Well, he was born in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I'm delighted to say that as of about a year ago, there's a plaque up at the house where he was born. So
Wow.
people in, I don't know, God bless whoever in Poughkeepsie did that because he never got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but he does have a plaque up at his birthplace. By all accounts, his childhood was basically a fairly normal, middle class upbringing, with the caveat that his mother wanted a girl and she dressed him in girls' clothing. And she would do that, all through his childhood. Now, this raises questions about whether his cross-dressing, by a modern definition, one might consider him gender fluid. I don't think he identified that way, but it raises questions about to what extent was it nature, to what extent was it nurture. I don't know, but what I do know is that he himself sort of like, uh, according to people who knew him, sort of blamed his mother for that. Um, anyway, he served in the Second World War. He didn't fight in the Battle of Tarawa, but he was like part of the cleanup crew after. And then after that, he eventually made his way west. He was somebody who, when he was growing up in Poughkeepsie, loved going to the movies, was obsessed with the movies. He loved Western serials. He loved Bela Lugosi horror movies, that sort of thing. He especially loved Westerns, and he wanted to go to Hollywood and make movies like that. And, by the time he got to Hollywood in the late 40s, the early 50s, those kinds of movies that he loved were basically going out of fashion. But I mean, one of the things I find charming about him is that he still wanted to make them. When he eventually hooked up with Bela Lugosi, I'm sure there's a sort of pragmatic side to that where it's like, okay, here's the star I have access to. and he's somebody I can make movies around. But at the same time, he clearly loved Lugosi. And when you watch Bride of the Monster, it's such a Lugosi fan film. It's like a child who grew up watching Bela Lugosi movies, wanting to make his own in a way that's kind of not revisionist at all. It's not really, aside from the sort of atomic age gimmick, it's not really up to the times. And I find that very charming about him. He came to Hollywood wanting to make the sort of movies that he liked growing up.
It seems to be
eventually he ended up making porn. Yeah.
It seems to be a key element of his cinema as well, and maybe some of what we watching it find attractive is at heart there's a sort of sentimentalism, there's a nostalgia to the films that they're kind of trying to it reminds me a little bit of sort of those meta films like Be Kind, Rewind or The Son of Rambo, where people are trying to recreate a movie rather than create something new.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, people have observed those two that you mentioned are a good comparison. People have observed that, in Plan 9 from Outer Space, when you see the flying saucers on the string, it's almost like his idea of a special effect. It's like insert this kind of scene here. In Plan 9 from Outer Space, for example, like, not to pick apart the plot and point to holes or anything, but we're being told that flying saucers are being seen over Hollywood. Everyone can see them. They're terrorizing Hollywood. They've literally blown up a town. And then also that it's top secret. And it's classified government information that flying saucers are here. And you're thinking, well, this is because Ed Wood has seen flying saucer movies and he knows that there's a scene where the military guys are like, we gotta keep this undercover. Nobody can know about this. And he knows that there are scenes where the flying saucers terrorize Los Angeles, and he wants both those scenes in the movie. And it doesn't really matter that they don't fit together. So yeah, he loves, I think this is one reason why Ed Wood's movies have endured in their way. It's because they do have this love of movies to them. They have this let's put on a show energy. Yeah. I actually I'll just say on that, I recently had cause to revisit Tommy Wiseau's The Room, which I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
Yes.
Yeah, the big bad movie of the 21st century. And I enjoy The Room. It's a very, very funny movie. But it occurred to me that I think it's less rich than certain of the Ed Wood movies, just because it is basically you're laughing at it because it's this terrible man who doesn't fit in, like trying to make a movie that's this kind of like vindictive, like strange self-expression. And I don't think there's the love of movies in there that there is in Plan 9 from Outer Space or Glen or Glenda. I think you're kind of on Ed Wood's side. At least I am when I watch Ed Wood's movies. I kind of like him as a guy, and that sustains me. I think that makes the movies rich. And I don't like Tommy Wiseau as a guy, which I think makes, as much as I enjoy The Room, I think it makes The Room a somewhat more limited experience.
Yeah, I mean, lots of people. I remember when The Room sort of pops up on YouTube occasionally, and there's always a version with the sex scene cut out. It's sort of like you can watch the non-sex scene version because many people feel icky about watching, watching him sort of play out his fantasies, essentially.
And understandably so, although, man, the guy is a rockin' bod for, he's for a guy who's 55 or whatever. He kept in good shape, and hats off to him.
Bless. Yeah, it puts the rest of us to shame, sure, certainly. So he comes over and he starts making movies. What were his first films that he's making? Because Plan 9 comes a little bit later, is that right?
Yeah, the first major thing that he did, well, he was acting in community theater. He was working as like a gopher at Universal Studios, just as a production assistant. Apparently people who knew him say that he was working on the set of Abbott and Costello in the Foreign Legion, and he was just awestruck at the desert set. He was like, wow, look at all this sand. This is amazing, which, again, beautiful. I love that. I love this guy. But he worked in community theater, and through there he made some of his first professional connections is a strong term, but professional connections. He met a guy named Crawford John Thomas, who was had inherited a lot of money, and the two of them started a company called Wood Thomas Productions that was going to make TV commercials. And if you go online, you can see some of the TV commercials that he made in the late 40s, for early television, and they're cute, they're all right. But what he really wanted to do was make movies, so he convinced Crawford Thomas to spend a lot of money on a Western called Crossroads of Laredo, which they shot it without sound. And I guess they ran out of money. Anyway, Ed Wood kind of, you know, ghosted Crawford Thomas after that. I think that would be the modern way you would describe it. Left Crawford Thomas in a lot of debt. And many years later, that movie Crossroads of Laredo was reassembled kind of in the wake of the Tim Burton biopic. They did the other side of the wind to it. They put it together, and it's like it was made in the early 50s, but it looks like it was made in 1902. It looks like an Edwin S. Porter production or something. It's like, God, it's insane that they thought they could sell this. So there was that. I mean, he shot a TV pilot or a TV movie, a little half-hour drama called The Sun Was Setting. Little things like this, but the connection with Lugosi was very important. He had a roommate named Alex Gordon, who was a British movie buff, who came over very much like Ed Wood, grew up loving Westerns, loving horror movies. So they bonded over this. And Alex Gordon uh, he became a sort of assistant to, oh God, it wasn't Roy Rogers. It wasn't Hopalong Cassidy either. Oh, it was Gene Autry. That's who it was. Sort of a faded cowboy star. And he also served a similar function to Lugosi. And as a sort of like amateur ad hoc publicist. And Ed Wood was able to, Ed Wood had this connection to Lugosi, and he starts furiously all over town pitching Lugosi projects, which doesn't mean a whole lot. And while he's doing this, he's pitching the movies that become Bride of the Monster, Jailbait. While he's doing this, a company called Screen Classics announces that they're going to make a movie about the life of Christine Jorgensen, who is the first transgender woman to undergo a widely publicized gender reassignment surgery in the United States, at least. And Ed Wood, goes to Screen Classics and he says to George Weiss, the founder, "I am the most qualified person in Hollywood to tell this story because I've lived it." And apparently that did not impress George Weiss, but what did impress George Weiss was that he had Lugosi, and he thought, okay, we can do something with Lugosi. Okay, you can make this movie. So that was kind of his origin in Hollywood.
Mm. And that, I remember in the book you talk about in the very early Western, to go back to that for a second, that they run out of horses at one point, or they run out of money and they can't have any more horses.
Yeah. And well, there's also a scene early on, maybe the first scene, it's uh the hero of the movie or the main character of the movie is, robbing a minor character played by Ed Wood, and he makes him get off his horse, and the horse just keeps getting in the shot, and then eventually the actors like kind of have to reorient themselves around the horse just while the camera's rolling. I mean, he definitely hadn't learned to make a movie yet. Like even to the extent that something like Bride of the Monster, like if you think that's not a competent film, Crossroads of Laredo, it's just like he doesn't know where to put the camera. He doesn't know anything. So yeah, I mean, I like all these movies. I like Crossroads of Laredo. I think it's got the movie love in it too.
I mean, it's the thing about being a bad filmmaker, where in a way the pleasure of it is suddenly recognizing that filmmaking exists as a craft, and you suddenly start going, oh, hang on a minute, that's blocking that isn't being done well, and even if you
Mhm.
don't know what blocking is, suddenly you're aware of it because this is exactly what it shouldn't be.
I mean, it's kind of an old truism that you learn more about, or you can learn more about movies by watching the ones that aren't done well. Um, a- and this is a digression, but on my podcast a little while ago, we did an episode on, we'll pick a director every week or a film related subject. And we did an episode on a guy named Edward Burns, not Edward Burns from the 90s, but Edward Burns, a guy who he started making Three Stooges movies in the 40s. And then he graduated to making like Bowery Boys comedies in the 50s and just a lot of like pretty B movie stuff. And I don't know, we just kind of got obsessed with this guy, Edward Burns. And we were watching his movies and I was kind of hoping they'd be better. They were just really, most of them were really bad and they were really badly directed. And I kept noticing that in almost all of his movies, his visual strategy is if you've got like three or four characters in a movie, line them up one next to each other, just all three abreast and have them talking to each other. And I feel like I kind of, even at my old age, I learned something about filmmaking by watching Edward Burns's films and thinking seriously about what he was doing. Because I was like, yeah, good filmmakers don't do this. They figure out visual ways they figure out interesting ways to convey space and to liven up a conversation through editing, through blocking, through composition that isn't just, lining people up as if they're against a wall and having them talk. So yeah, even in my old age, I keep learning things by watching directors who aren't that good.
I wonder if that's true today in terms of filmmakers today who are operating at a level in which their stuff gets out, gets seen. I mean, I suppose things like Sharknado and those
Mhm.
sort of rush jobs. I mean, there's a whole ecosystem of studios who rush out films with similar titles to bigger films. You'll find an Avatar, rather than Avatar.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're often sort of, again, not so bad they're good, but just so bad they're bad. I find a lot of
I mean,
television
I've
often has that
seen
as well.
oh, sure, sure. I mean, those kinds of movies you're talking about. I mean, I've seen a certain number of them, and I've definitely noticed that now that people don't have to shoot on 35 millimeter film, the median standard of quality has decreased a lot. If you're looking at a direct to video movie from the 90s, typically it's lit pretty well, even if it's bad, you
Yeah,
know? Typically the blocking is generally okay because they film was at a premium and it's not easy to shoot on film. So there was a minimum standard of quality. The people making those movies in the 90s were trained technicians. And now, I mean, I guess it has become more democratic, but a lot of those movies you go on Tubi or one of those platforms to watch really are just worse than ever.
yeah, yeah. And Democratic, I think, is doing a lot of lifting there. Um, I
Yeah.
mean, I also kind of quite like seeing a really good filmmaker be sloppy sometimes. I remember watching Cassandra's Dream, one of Woody Allen's, not his best work, but there's a scene in that in which Colin Farrell and Ewan McGregor, one of them says the wrong line, and the other one almost says the line that should have happened. They basically get their line swapped up, and they manage to repair it in some way. But you can tell that they've garbled it, and they're kind of looking at each other, and then they carry on. And obviously, like Ed Wood in the Tim Burton film, Woody Allen's just gone print next setup. That was fantastic, and
That's amazing. Yeah, yeah.
and you just think, how
I mean,
did
his,
that
his
get out?
yeah, I mean his movies, especially like the second half of his career, are full of strange decisions like that I mean, could talk all day about some of them. A filmmaker like that, I recently watched, for the first time in a long time, one of Charlie Chaplin's last movies, A King in New York. I don't know if
Mm,
you've ever seen that
yeah, I've
one.
seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was his second last movie, and it was the first one he made after basically being exiled from the United States. And he's somebody who, for most of his career, had his own studio, had his own technicians who were just, even if he wasn't making movies, they were full-time staff. And so these were people who just knew all of his whims. And now, for the first time in decades, he's making a movie with a new crew in an unfamiliar place. He has the cinematographer who shot like The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, a great cameraman, and the movie looks appallingly bad. Like the lighting is terrible, the set decoration is terrible. It's very flat looking. Uh it's sloppy in a lot of ways. It's also kind of pure Chaplin in a lot of
Mm.
ways. Like it's kind of seeing him lean into all of his worst or sloppiest tendencies. I mean, there are things about that movie that I like, but technically, it's a bit like to see a great filmmaker kind of leaning into their worst qualities. It's a bit like seeing a friend get drunk, It's
Mm,
like,
mm.
okay, that's recognizably the person, but but certain things about them are getting amplified.
Yeah, I'm beginning to lose respect for you. I think you, I think taxis outside. Let's order coffee, eh? Let's have a coffee now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Bring as much coffee to the table as you can.
Absolutely.
So so what point do we get Glenn and Glenda and Plan 9 from outer space? Is this at this point that he's made these westerns, he's made some movies. He's not demonstrated any particular skill in making films, except for the fact that he just got something made, which is kind of an achievement.
It is an achievement, especially then. I mean, I'd say that his greatest talent, and I do mean this, is as a writer. I'm not saying he's a great writer, but he was a fast writer. He was an enthusiastic writer, and he was a basically competent writer. So, the fact that he spent the last 20 years of his life making a living as a writer of these potboiler books, and there's something to that, the ability to just generate that much content, generate that many stories. And some of his books I kind of like, unironically. I think he's an enthusiastic storyteller. So that I would say is where his talent is, to the extent that he has talent. But Glenn or Glenda, yeah, it was originally supposed to be this biopic about Christine Jorgensen, but I guess Christine Jorgensen dropped out or thought she could get more money somewhere else. And so uh, Ed Wood wrote this script that became this sort of confessional. It became less about the transgender angle. It becomes this story of two characters. There's him as Glenn, in this very pseudo autobiographical story about a man who is engaged to be married to this wonderful, beautiful girl named Barbara, played by his actual girlfriend in real life, Dolores Fuller. And he's just got this one secret that he can't hide, which is that he is compelled. He has this uncontrollable compulsion to wear women's clothing. And this was, his actual dilemma in real life with Dolores Fuller. This movie represented his sort of coming out to her. So that's incredibly powerful. And then the second story, which takes up much less screen time, is about a transgender woman named, first named Alan and then becomes Anne, who, grew up a rather effeminate child, served in the war, apparently had the exact same wartime experiences as Ed Wood, and then had a gender reassignment surgery. So it's a very kind of achingly personal movie in a lot of ways. I think it did okay. Like it was meant to sort of lead to better things for him. It was a credit. It was experience. He had a kind of flurry of productivity in the 1950s. I guess he was just at his peak then. Just alcoholism hadn't completely taken over his life, which it would in the 60s. And I think that really impeded him. I think his other talent beyond writing is that he had a certain gift of gab. There were a lot of people who saw through him and regarded him as a sort of second rate, a lot of people who knew to avoid him. But every now and then he would be able to sort of bamboozle somebody into giving him a certain amount of money to make a movie. And that continued through the 50s. I mean, Bride of the Monster in 1955 is probably the pinnacle of his success. It's his slickest movie. It's a Lugosi vehicle, so it's the biggest star he ever had. It did pretty well on the drive-in circuit, although he himself never made any money from it. But after Lugosi died, that hurt him. Also, frankly, I don't think he was built to make, the kinds of movies he wanted to make. He wasn't really keeping up with the times. It's crazy to think that the year after he made Night of the Ghouls was the year that Psycho came out, you know?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like throughout the 50s, you can imagine, you know, these movies. I don't think Ed Wood had a Rosemary's Baby in him or a Night of the Living Dead in him or all these movies that were coming out and redefining the genre in the 60s. So yeah, there was a huge flurry of activity in the 50s, and none of it made him a lot of money. People have called him a bit of a con man, but he was a con man for art. He never made any money himself. And then after 1960, it becomes basically a lot of paperback novels and pornographic films. Although I think there's much of interest in that work too.
Well, you make this point in the book that the film, the Tim Burton film, sort of stops and puts up a card, and we're supposed to think that the making of Plan 9 from Outer Space is this kind of, you know, triumph. It's played very much as a triumph. A little bit like The Disaster Artist uses The Room as it's a biography of how the film gets made as much as it is of the filmmakers. And then the rest of Ed Wood's life is, he did other things, but we're not going to go into them. And your sort of point is, well, actually, no, the rest of his life has a validity to it that we should look at, and that you do look at.
I think so. I mean, I understand the perspective of Tim Burton and Scott and Larry, who wrote the movie. First of all, they've got to condense this life into a pleasing 2-hour film, so they focus on the part that's most fun, which I completely get. And I think they're also faced in the question, or they're faced with the question when they're making that movie of who wants to watch the story of a bad artist who failed. So their angle on it is he may have been a bad filmmaker, but he made a lot of friends along the way, and he had a lot of creativity. And hey, you haven't made a movie, and he did. So got to hand it to him. And I think that's a valid perspective on Ed Wood. But it is kind of funny. That movie has basically the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood ending. It sort of drifts into fantasy in that last scene because it imagines Plan 9 having this, stunning premiere at the Pantages where it's rapturously received. And I think Tim Burton himself has said that he kind of thinks the last little bit of the movie takes place in Ed Wood's head. I think that if there's a rejoinder to the question of who wants to watch a bad artist fail, I think the rejoinder would be, well, he did remain an artist. And I find something kind of inspiring about, he may not have been making the stuff that he wanted to make in the last 20 years, but some of those books, some of those movies feel very achingly personal in the same way that Glenn or Glenda did. He's writing all this stuff, and I think he really is. It's coming straight from the subconscious, and he's really expressing himself. And it must be said, apparently Ed Wood took great pride in his paperback novels. He had a whole shelf of them. He would show them to friends. They pop up on eBay sometimes where it has his stamp at the beginning from the personal library of Edward D. Wood Jr. and him signing them. All these books with titles like Death of a Transvestite and Diary of a Transvestite Hooker. Yeah, apparently he really did take pride in his work. And I think that's beautiful.
Absolutely, I totally agree that's again, go back to Lynch a little bit. He's living the art life, and there's no guarantee that you're actually going to produce anything good. It's what is it? There's a film called The Bleeder with Liev Schreiber, and it's about the boxers that the whole ecosystem of boxing requires that there are loads of people who don't mind losing because if you didn't have those, if everybody was going for the championship, going to become the champion, then there wouldn't be enough fighters around to last because you've got to have people who are just fine with losing, and to be in the other corner.
I also think there's something kind of inspiring about the fact that he was still he was still excited about filmmaking basically to his dying day. He was still dreaming up projects. He was still writing scripts. He was still trying to make deals. There's another kind of flurry of activity in terms of filmmaking in the late 60s, early 70s, where all of a sudden he makes like 4 or 5 movies that he directs. Most of them, well, all of them pornographic to varying degrees. Some of them are softcore, some of them are hardcore. But well, for example, he did most of his writing for a company called Pendulum Press, which later the people who made that later turned it into a company called Caballero, which is still in existence. It's one of the big like porn firms. But he was one of the early building blocks of that company, writing these books. And at one point, one of the founders said something like, "Okay, we're gonna go into filmmaking," and he says, "Oh, I'll do it. I'll do it. What do you want? I'll do anything." He was so excited to just make a movie. And so he makes Necromania, which, if anyone's seen it, they'll know it's a pornographic film, although it's set in a haunted house. It's got supernatural elements. It's got references to Bela Lugosi. The final scene takes place in a coffin. It's got skulls and stuff everywhere. It's also got certain of the themes that it's dealing with in terms of the marriage and sexual impotence now we're getting really into the weeds of auteurism, but like it's stuff that he was clearly obsessed with. If you read enough of his books, he was very, very interested in these topics, among others. So I don't know. I'm clearly just brain damaged from prolonged exposure to Ed Wood, but I watch Necromania and I see Ed all over it. And I feel like I'm hanging out with my buddy again, even though it's, a really like a $5,000 pornographic film from 1970.
And I mean, you mentioned as well that the character's name Shirley, is it, comes up all the time throughout his work as a character name, and it's almost like an alter ego.
That's right, because Shirley was his drag name.
Mm.
And, people have found, shout out to Elizabeth Purcell, who found this from the early 60s, this like drag magazine that has a letter in it from Shirley and has Shirley's picture, and it's Ed Wood in drag. And it's Shirley talking about, their experience with drag. Mind you, Ed Wood in real life identified as a heterosexual male, and that was apparently very important to him. Nevertheless, he had a drag persona called Shirley. So, and he was Shirley when he was Shirley. So I don't know. I don't know how he would identify now, but yeah, you see the name Shirley appear in movie after movie, and you know, one could spend all day thinking about the autobiographical resonances of that, but I do think that was his alter ego. Whenever you see a Shirley, that's Ed Wood.
When he goes into this later burst of activity, is he a more competent filmmaker than he was? I mean, even given the low budget constraints.
It's a good question. Standards of competence, I think, become something different in particular kinds of sexploitation and pornographic films. Now, Necromania cost something like $5,000 or $7,000. The fact that he made a movie for $5,000 or $7,000 in 2 days and that it's basically presentable, I think speaks well of him. That speaks well of his basic skills. I mean, are they slick, polished films? No, they're flawed in a million ways, but I do think, the best one is a softcore film called Take It Out in Trade, which I think is kind of good, actually. I think it's the one, aside from Glen or Glenda, I think it's the one of his whole filmography that I would look at and say, this complicates the idea that he was a bad filmmaker. Because it's a sort of detective story. People have, called it Ed Wood's Inherent Vice. It's this detective who's bouncing around Hollywood trying to find this like missing heiress who has gone to work at a brothel. And it's a very funny movie. It makes a lot of jokes about Ed Wood's low budget circumstances. So, there's a running gag where this detective is using this girl's parents' expense account to just fund these completely arbitrary trips to Europe. And, Ed Wood will be with his camera outside LAX airport, and he'll show you a plane taking off, and then he'll cut to a scene of like somebody wearing a beret in front of a poster that says Paris. And that's the kind of thing that I think is really funny. And that shows a self-awareness on Ed Wood's part of like, yeah, this is a cheap movie. I know it's a cheap movie. There's a kind of the way he's using color in some of his later pornographic movies as well. All this red shag carpeting and, you know, really, really aggressive primary colors, I think bespeaks an imaginative filmmaker, if not necessarily a tasteful one. Yeah, I don't know. I think to answer your question, I think his work in that realm uh, adds to the case for him as being not the worst filmmaker of all time. I think he accomplishes certain things in that realm that are worthy of respect.
Well, I think we're working on Ed Burns being the worst filmmaker of all
Yeah,
time, replacing him.
yeah,
And I do mean Ed Burns from the 90s. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
yeah. Brothers McMullen. Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to get too much blowback on that front. It's interesting you bring up the word taste, because after reading your book, or actually while I was reading your book, I decided I was going to watch some Ed Wood, and then I watched, as well as Ed Wood, I watched some John Waters films that I hadn't seen previously, and it just struck me that, well, I mean, obviously there's a huge difference because Waters from Multiple Maniacs on, you know, is he is born knowing where to put a camera and what a shot is and how to, and he's a marvelous filmmaker. He's
Mhm.
his content and all the rest of it might be scrappy or this, that, or the other, but he's not in any way a bad filmmaker. Um, and likewise, Divine is an absolute tour de force as an actor, and not in any way. There's no sense that you're watching Pink Flamingos or Multiple Maniacs thinking this is so bad it's good. You're thinking this is good. It's tasteless, but it's doing that on purpose. So I just kind of wanted to sort of bring these filmmakers together because I do feel there are sort of touching points.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, Divine is also amazing in Hairspray too, where he plays a completely different kind of character. Like the range that Divine had, I think was quite underappreciated in his lifetime.
Absolutely,
Um,
totally agree.
Uh, another kind of difference that John Waters has with Ed Wood is I think John Waters was savvier in certain ways. He was very zeitgeisty. He's somebody who, he also grew up very far from the entertainment capitals, but he was reading Variety and he was reading Jonas Mekus's column in the Village Voice. And he was like, okay, if I make this kind of movie, I can play at the Filmmakers Underground Co-op, or I can play the Midnight Movie Circuit,
Mm.
and that will launch me. So there's a canny careerism to John Waters, not to, and I don't say that in an insulting way at all, because like I think John Waters has stayed very true to his vision. He's remained firmly himself for his whole career, which I really respect. Um, I also think, yeah, like so John Waters is a better filmmaker than Ed Wood. No surprise there. One of the reasons why he's a better filmmaker, I think, is because there is a real project, there's a conscious project at work in a lot of Waters movies from the beginning to the end, where he's basically saying everything that polite bourgeois middle class society considers bad or ugly is actually good and beautiful, and vice versa. There's that great scene in Female Trouble, I think it is, where a couple of the characters are walking down, some suburban street, and they're saying, "Oh, look at how horrible this street is. Look how ugly it is. It's terrible." And they're dressed like John Waters characters, and I feel like that's sort of emblematic of his project as a whole. unavoidably, one of the things that makes Ed Wood compelling is that he was aiming for technical competence, I think. He was aiming
Mm.
to make well-made movies in the Hollywood style, and he failed. And especially in the 1950s work. And a lot of the poetry of those films comes from that the tension, or whatever word I'm looking for, between what he aimed to achieve and what he actually did achieve. I think one commonality, or one thing that these two filmmakers have in common is they were outsiders to the system, and their films. I mean, John Waters eventually became a real insider, but their early films, at least, there's that kind of like dress up quality to them, and there's that kind of like simulating what a Hollywood movie looks like with very minimal resources, and also the kind of Warholian like let let's make a star system out of the people around me quality that both of them have. I
Mm.
think I think that's something they have in common.
Yeah, let's get the gang together, and we're going to shoot this person as if they're the most famous person in the world, and
Yeah,
regardless of
100%. Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
What else do you see as? I mean, I watch my experience of watching Ed Wood is this is gonna be a real leap here, but stay with me. It's a little bit like reading James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. It redefines what reading is, and it makes me feel what reading is, and it takes away the usual things that I hold on to when I read, like narrative and character and continuity and all those things, and even like the integrity of words for Joyce. And for Ed Wood, I feel the same thing in terms of I'm not watching it because of believability of performance or for consistency of narrative or for, even sort of something generically making sense or space making sense. And it just makes me so much more aware of my watching something. Do you know what I
Oh,
mean?
sure.
So to
Well,
the
when I
extent that
watch
good
Glenn
or
or
bad is
Glenda,
wrong, good or bad is the least interesting thing about it.
well, yeah, Glenn or Glenda, I think is a perfect example of this, where, uh, yeah, it's technically shoddy, and the elements don't quite fit together, and he's trying to express something very strongly, but he doesn't have the language to express it, or he doesn't know how to express it. And there's something, I think, extremely human in that failure, the failure of expression. Um, and in that humanity, uh, is located something that I think is much more powerful and true and beautiful than, I don't know, what's a really competent mainstream film about LGBTQ issues? I haven't seen it, but like, is Roland Emmerich's Stonewall like a better film than Ed Wood's Glen or Glenda? Like probably not, because like in the things that it's struggling to do, you know, Ed Wood's film has this like deep truth and humanity to it that I think is very powerful. And there are a lot of filmmakers kind of on Ed Wood's level, where or filmmakers who s- complicate complicate the traditional standards of quality, where you are invested in the reality of the world they create. You're invested in the truth of the world they create. There are these filmmakers who I love, who are working right now. They're based out of New England, named Matt Farley and Charlie Roxburgh, and they make these movies. They've made something like 15 or 20 of these underground films over the last 20 years. And the whole cast and crew are just people from New England,
Mm.
like uncles and coworkers, and people's nephews and stuff like that. And if you watch enough of these films, Don't Let the River Beast Get You is probably the most famous one. There's another one called Magic Spot that's very good. And if you watch enough of these films, these people who are in these movies, just incredibly normal people from Massachusetts and New Hampshire, they become very familiar to you, just as the John Waters gang does. And because these are kind of homemade movies with just normal people, uh, there are certain well, Brechtian is a heavy word, but you
I've
know what
just
I mean. I'm
mentioned
going to use it
Finnegan's
as a
Wake.
shorthand.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to use it as a shorthand. There's a certain Brechtian quality of like you're constantly being reminded this is a movie. Part of the humor of it, part of the joke of it is that people like this wouldn't normally be in a movie. But whenever I watch these movies, the internal reality that they create is so consistent. It is so rigorous that by halfway through, I am deeply invested in the plot, and I love these characters. If the people in the movies aren't acting in the style that, say, Marlon Brando is acting in, they're still acting in a style that's very consistent and works with everyone else in this world. And you know, it kind of reminds you that all the things you've been taught about how movies are supposed to work don't actually matter if the filmmaker is able to create their own reality that you know draws you in.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the guy died recently. American movie, the documentary by Chris Smith,
Oh,
and one of the subjects of that film, because he was trying to make a film called Coven, um, and he
Coven, because coven rhymes with oven, and he didn't like that.
oh, that's right.
Yeah,
And he had his friend who was Mike Shank, the sort
yeah.
of the dog's body friend who would do everything to help him out. But again, it has that sort of
Mhm.
can do. This is going to be terrible, and yet they really want they really want to do it, and they really have a love for what they're doing and a vision. And they kind of, we use the word democratic recently, but it is that thing of like, well, why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't
Mhm.
they just go ahead? Also, by the way, interesting you just mentioned Marlon Brando because there's a bit in David Lynch's autobiography where he describes Marlon Brando coming over to his house later in his life when he was, towards the end of his life, and he would frequently arrive in drag. And
Huh, that's
there's
funny. How did I forget that?
yeah, and so there
Yeah.
was sort of another example of someone who, I mean, I think Marlon Brando was pretty much bisexual for his whole life. So it's one of those. I don't know why Marlon Brando hasn't been more claimed by the LGBTQ community because, you think that would be
Yeah.
one of the big ones.
Yeah, he famously did he have sex with Richard Pryor, was it? There was that story going around.
Yeah,
There were
yeah.
some famous people that yeah.
He had sex
Um
with Vivian Lee and Laurence Olivier while, like staying um, at their house. Because I think he'd had sex with Vivian Lee, and Vivian Lee was a little bit guilty because Laurence Olivier was in the house. So she was stormed off to tell her husband about it and tearfully confess, only to find him in the arms of Marlon
wow.
Brando.
That's great. It's like Teorama.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, Brilliant, Will. Well, listen. Let's finish off with your recommended film book for our listeners.
Well, first of all, I haven't mentioned this, but I'm a great admirer of your book about Terrence Malick. So I would
Oh,
recommend that.
thank you.
I'm not just blowing smoke. I mean, that was a day one purchase for me.
Oh, thank you so
Um,
much. Blow away, by the way, and review on Amazon or wherever else reviews are visible.
I will. But a recent book, one that just came out this year that you can get on Amazon that I really enjoyed was a book called We Must Shoot: The Life and Art of Gary Graver. It's by Andrew J. Rausch as well as David Wayne and Maddie Budrowitz. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, but it's a biography of Gary Graver, who was most famous as being Orson Welles's cameraman for the last 15 years of his life. He was basically Orson Welles, after a number of years in Europe, came back to Hollywood, and Gary Graver called him up and said, I will be your cameraman. I will be there whenever you want, whatever you need, I'll just do it. And Orson Welles said, there's only one cameraman who volunteered his services to me, and it was Greg Toland. So maybe this is fate. So he basically became Orson Welles's indentured servant, unpaid indentured servant for the last 15 years. It like in some ways ruined his life. Multiple marriages were destroyed because Orson Welles would just call him up and be like, Gary, get over here. We're filming. And, he shot F for Fake. He shot The Other Side of the Wind, and he shot countless unmade projects or unfinished, I mean. And he made his living. He paid the bills he was a cinematographer on, Dracula versus Frankenstein by Al Adamson, Grand Theft Auto by Ron Howard, many, many B movies, a lot of Fred Olen Ray. And he also directed pornography. Through the 80s and the 90s, he made dozens upon dozens of porn films, which was he considered a deep secret, even though everyone knew it. So, this book, the first half of it is an oral history with a lot of people who knew Gary Graver. And the second half of it is a number of capsule reviews of every single one of his directorial credits, including, the mainstream stuff and the pornographic films. And the portrait that emerges of Gary Graver in this book, I think, is quite powerful, quite ambiguous. He's a bit, it's sad in some ways, his relationship with Orson Welles, but it's also like, it's the thing that gave him meaning. He was obviously looking for a father figure. He was obviously a very talented cinematographer who never quite, he was always hoping that he would be recognized for the work with Orson Welles, which of course he never really was in his life. And he was always hoping that, he'd be called to the big leagues basically, but he never was, frankly, because in addition to the Welles stuff, he was just so well known for, he just wanted to work. He wanted to work every single day. So he never became part of the union because that would keep him from doing non-union jobs. So he just made like tons and tons of B movies and porn movies, which obviously hurt his reputation. So yeah, I was I was compelled all over again by the complexities and ambiguities of Gary Graver,
Wow.
who in some ways has my favorite career of all time as a cinematographer. To shoot F for Fake and to shoot Amber by Night, I think is an amazing career.
There's something sort of Boogie Nights meets The Player about it, isn't there? Sort of
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's fascinating. That's amazing. And anything Orson Welles adjacent is really is fantastic. What's the title once more?
It's called We Must Shoot: The Life and Art of Gary Graver. And it's
Brilliant.
on Amazon.
Excellent. So I shall be looking that up and contacting the authors forthwith. Um, I,
Yes.
there was Brian De Palma, I remember in an interview once saying that all these directors who are all quite famous, kind of all of them did night shifts shooting porn because that's where you could get cameras. Those are the people who had all the equipment. So it was how did you learn to use equipment if not shooting porno?
I've definitely heard that. I mean, Wes Craven, I think his first or second directorial effort is a porn film. Abel Ferreira is another one. And those are just the ones who are known. Those are the ones who directed ones that it's come to the surface. I'm sure there were a lot of others. Yeah, and I mean Gary Graver he shot second unit on Raiders of the Lost Ark because like one of the people who worked on The Other Side of the Wind was Frank Marshall, who of course became like Steven Spielberg's right-hand man. So
Right.
he would occasionally throw Gary Graver some work, like you can shoot second unit on The Color Purple or something like that. And he's doing that, and he's also doing, you know, yeah, tons and tons of porn. How can you not love that career?
I've just thought of a great idea for a script actually, which is someone hears a rumor about Spielberg's first porn movie, and they're sort of it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark, except for like a can of celluloid that is hidden somewhere.
I love that since Spielberg has for most of his career shied away from sex so thoroughly. I would love the idea that like maybe he was secretly traumatized by working on working
Yeah.
on a porno in 1970. Yeah,
I mean, the sex scene I always remember from Spielberg's work
Munich.
is, yeah, took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah. In which
Well,
case,
yeah, and it's
again, it's
like it.
trauma.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I mean, God, I've come to the point where I'm almost sympathetic to that scene. It's such a big swing, you know?
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I thought the Fablemans, when he sort of falls for the Christian girl, first
Mhm.
of all, I thought she was the best thing in the movie, and the whole movie
Mhm.
sort of lit up when she was on screen. And I just felt like old Spielberg, was like looking at his first crush and shooting her
Yeah.
appropriately. I didn't think anything else in the movie was as full of life as that scene and her performance was.
Yeah, yeah, I liked that too. I liked the Fablemans, by the way. I mean, Spielberg is such a kind of, I mean, he's such an impenetrable figure to me because he, lives on the highest echelon of society, and he has made so many movies that are kind of like I sometimes look at certain of his movies and I think like, God, like who are you exactly?
Mm.
Like what's beneath the surface of you? And I appreciated the Fablemans as a sort of, certain disquieting things in that movie as a sort of like I think he expresses himself in that movie probably more than he ever has.
No, I think you're right. I think and I agree with you about, we often look at artists and we think of them, and it goes back to what we were talking about artists earlier with Ed Wood. We sort of think, oh well, they're basically human beings. They're basically like us. They're expressing a human reality, a lived experience. But then you hear about, like, for instance, recently I heard a friend of mine, well, somebody who runs a film festival, had invited Martin Scorsese to to receive an honor, and they had communicated with his people and said, obviously we'll fly him over business class and blah blah
Mhm.
blah, and pay for everything. And the reply came back: Mr. Scorsese has not flown commercial for 30 years. Uh,
Incredible.
and it's just
God
like,
damn.
hang on a minute. That's like kind of like everywhere you go smells of paint, everywhere you don't know. You don't have money in your pocket because you never pay for anything. And you're making films about lived experience. Yeah, I mean, it's at a certain point. Well, I mean, I don't think Scorsese is. I think Scorsese's always making films about filmed experience, but yeah, it's a weird. As you say, you are living in an elevated sphere at that point.
No, totally. God, it's amazing hearing that. It's amazing to me that Scorsese's movies are as good as they are.
Mm.
If he's been living like that for that long.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an obsession with me that people who are famous from childhood make good actors, because how can you do that if you've never actually sort of just walked into a supermarket and bought something without thinking, "Oh, I hope nobody recognizes me"? I mean, Timothy Chalamet was in Interstellar, Ryan Gosling was in the
Yeah.
Disney Club. These people have never, they don't know what it's like not to be famous.
Yeah, God, I don't have the answer to that, but that's an interesting
Oh,
question.
eh. Sorry, off topic, totally off topic.
No, no, I
Will,
love it. I love it.
where can we find your work?
Let's see. I have two podcasts. I'm always on the grind. There's a film history podcast called The Important Cinema Club, and there's a culture and politics podcast called Michael and Us. I'm on the socials, and yeah, the book is Ed Wood Made in Hollywood, USA, which I highly recommend getting from the publisher or books. I have learned recently, and I'm sure you'll know this too, that or ordering from the publisher is best for everyone.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally go with that. With all the books, I try to put on either an independent book link or a
Mhm.
publisher link. Otherwise, yes, in certain cases, there's no choice but to go for Amazon. But if you can avoid
Mhm.
Amazon, that's the best for the world. Jeff Bezos, he'll be fine. You don't need to worry
Well,
about
I mean,
him.
we got to fund his next wedding somehow, and if we don't all chip in, who knows what'll happen?
Absolutely. I'd hate to think that, that it was for some lack of a book sale that they couldn't afford that all important safety element to his next rocket. That would really, that would put a crimp in my day. Well, listen,
Yeah.
Will, it's been an absolute joy talking to you, a real pleasure. And what a great book. I really loved it. I
Oh,
highly recommend it for everyone.
oh, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.